Welcome to Centennial Oral Histories, a series featuring former and current leaders of Duke University and Duke Health, sharing memories of their time at Duke and their hopes for Duke's future. Enjoy this discussion with Sally Robinson, a Duke alumna and former member of the Duke Board of Trustees, as she discusses her history with Duke University that began over 80 years ago. She is interviewed by the Reverend Dr. Luke Powery, Dean of Duke Chapel.
I'm Luke Powery, and this is the Duke University Oral Histories program, and I'm so delighted to be with Sally Robinson today. Sally, it's great to see you.
Thank you, Luke. It's great to be here.
Well, we know that you have a very long history with the university, and you cultivated this relationship with Duke from a very young age. And I heard that you used to listen to football games on the radio. And so is that how your love for Duke began? And if so, also, or if not, how has your relationship with Duke changed over the years?
Well, thank you for asking that.
You.
My mother and father had 4 boys in 8 years. Thought they were done, and I showed up 6 years later. So I grew up adoring these 4 boys. 3 of them went to NC State, where my father had gone when it was called Agriculture and Manufacturing. Oh, shows how old that was. So Jim did not want to go into textiles, so he went to Duke. And I just heard the family talk about Duke. I'm 8 years old at the point I'm going to tell you about. It's 1942, the Japanese have bombed Pearl Harbor, and it was decided that the Rose Bowl, which Duke was playing in, would not be played in California, but be played in Durham at what we now call Wallace Wade Stadium. So I was pretty much oblivious to all this, though I did like to kick a football because my brothers did.
Okay.
But my mother, they had 4 tickets. My mother and father were going, and 2 of my brothers who were not yet in college. And my father got sick with a laryngitis-type illness, and he couldn't go, so one of the other sons got to go. So my dad, who was a draftsman, sold textile machinery, but also did draft work for mills, he said to me, Sally, come on, we're going to have a good time listening to this game. And so he sketched out the football field. He lined it all up. Everything was precise. 20-yard line, all of that. And he said, now stand right here while I'm listening to the radio and see how I can move my pencil back and forth to show you how they're doing. And he said, I have one for the second half too. So I watched the whole Rose Bowl game standing looking over my father's shoulder while he wrote out the plays that he heard on the radio. And of course, it looked like we were going to win. But in the end, we lost by, I think, 5 points. And we were very crushed. But after that, I was a Duke fan. There was nothing that stepped in the way. And that's how it all began. And so, as I say, only one brother went to Duke. Well, he took a real interest in my being interested in Duke. And as a result, I got to go up with my mother and father to a few more ball games before Jim had to leave and go into the war. This was World War II. So that's how it all began.
Wow, with football.
With football.
Who would have thought that? I will remember that, Sally Robinson and Duke football. And so fast forward a little bit, obviously, you became an undergraduate student at Duke in the 1950s, and you were one of the few married students at the time on campus. What was Duke like then, and what was your experience like?
Well, when I came to Duke, I graduated from high school in 51. So when I came to Duke, my first 2 years, I lived in Bassett House.
Okay.
And having been in boarding school in Raleigh, it was not much of an adjustment. I felt comfortable. Had a roommate that I'd known at St. Mary's. We were very good friends. And so it was just a natural thing for me to be at Duke. I enjoyed living in Bassett House, and back in those days, the sororities meant something, and we went through Rush, and then we joined something called 80 Pi. I don't even know if it's still around.
Okay.
But I enjoyed it. But in the meantime, I was very much in love with Russell Robinson, whom I had started dating in high school, age 15.
Wow.
And he'd gone off to Princeton. And so he began to thumb down for the weekends, back in the day when people would get on the highway and thumb.
Oh, wow.
So he would come down, and we would have a great time, and then he'd thumb back. Well, about halfway through that year, his mother told him how wonderful he'd been to be away from me, since she knew how much she cared for me. So she gave him a railroad ticket to come down. He never told her he'd been thumbing for the rest of the time. But anyway, he decided to transfer to Duke so we could get married.
Wow.
So he left Princeton, came to Duke, and we had 1 year of just dating, being penned. And then we got married in 1953, right before my junior year.
Okay.
So we lived in a place called Poplar Apartments. I don't know, they're there. They look totally different, and a lot of them have been torn down.
Okay.
But at our time, Poplar Apartments, which had been built by J.A. Jones Construction Company, and Mr. Jones was very active, had been on the Duke Board. So we were able to get a one-bedroom apartment there, and almost everybody there was a married Duke student. Faculty, young faculty living there. We were one of maybe 2 or 3 undergraduate married students at that time. So it was different, and it was a bit of an adjustment, of course, trying to keep up with what class was what. We had 1 car. But we got through it, and Russ was number 1 in his class the whole way. And I worked hard to try to keep up a little bit with him. And so I graduated in 55.
Okay.
And Russ had 1 more year of law school. So we got pregnant with Cammie, our daughter, who went to Duke, by the way. And then we moved back to Charlotte after Russ had graduated from law school. And we've been in Charlotte ever since. Wow. And we've been married, I was telling your friends, 71 years. Which is, we're so...
That's amazing. Can I say it as Dean of the Chapel? That's a miracle.
I love it. I love it.
Oh, that's so wonderful.
So
that's
I'm 91,
so
and Russ will be 93 next month. So we're just blessed. And,
amazing.
And Duke is such a big part of our life. And, you know, I love it when Russ has, over the years, told the story that when he came, he thought, Duke, the professors won't be that good, not compared to Princeton. But he found that the professors he had, the 1 year before he went to law school, he said were better. And for us to say that was something. He loved law school, and as I say, he was number 1 in his class all 3 years.
Okay.
So he was born to be a lawyer.
Okay, wonderful.
So that's my experience as an undergraduate and a married student at Duke.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Fast forward even further, you served on the Duke Board of Trustees from 1995 to 2004. Can you talk about being elected to the trustees and some of the most important moments you remember from your time as a trustee?
Well, I would have never been on the Duke Board of Trustees had it not been for us. And that's true, and this is how. We have a summer home up in Linville, and there are several places like Grandfather Mountains and several resort places close by. And Russ was chairman of the Duke Endowment, and he got a phone call and said, we are going to bring Nan Cohan, she's brand new, we're going to bring her up in August. She's going to speak at one of at Beacon Heights Club. And we wondered, Russell, since you're chairman of the Duke Endowment, would you be willing, you and your wife, to let her stay with you? and Russell, of course. So that's how I met Nan.
Okay.
And we had such a good time together. That's how, I mean, just out of nowhere, I got a phone call from her saying, "You're being considered for the Duke Board. Would you be willing to serve?" And I said, "Oh, yes." But I said, "Nan, just the fact that you've called to say I'm being considered, if I'm not chosen, I'm still honored." So goodness, what a surprise. So somehow I did make it. And it was just, I only could serve 9 years instead of 10, because in those days, when you turned 70, you were off the board. It may be 72 now, so I'm not sure.
Okay.
So I had to leave 1 year before my term was up, but it was great. I grew up a lot. I mean, I was nervous being with all these outstanding people, but they stretched me. You know, I had to. I mean, when I was asked to chair this, what we call the Student Affairs Committee, and that put me on the executive committee, I thought, oh my gosh. But it was a beautiful experience for me. I grew. I loved Duke more and more, and Nan was fantastic. So that was great. And I will tell you this little special thing. We got a call. I had gone home after my last board meeting, and Nan left the same year. And I got a call from her assistant, said, "Nan wanted to know, could you and Russell possibly come up and spend the night at the Wash Duke and let them take you to supper? It'll be their last night in Durham." And I said, "Oh my goodness, what an honor, yes." So we went up, and we went out to a restaurant. I can't remember the name of it. It was a little bit out, not at Hope Valley, but near that. And when we picked them up, and we had a wonderful time. And when we took them home, I'll never forget the picture of Nan and Bob holding hands, walking in the house where they had been living for the last night that they would be on Duke campus.
Wow.
So it was a great experience.
Wow. So you're saying in many ways your service on the Board of Trustees really deepened your knowledge, like you said, it expanded you, but even your sort of your appreciation for Duke and love through that.
It moved beyond football and basketball.
There's actually more at Duke.
That's right. No, it was 9 of the best years of my life, no question.
Wow.
No question.
Wow.
And Nan was superb as a president.
That's wonderful. I know talking about President Nan Cohen, obviously was the first woman president at the university.
Yes.
Through your perspective and relationship with her, what was that like? Talk about that experience of Duke having its first woman president, and all of the various dynamics.
Well, of course, being a woman, I love that. And there were a few women on the board, some wonderful ones, but there were still at least 3/4 men, at least 3/4.
Okay.
And I think Wilhelmina Rubin Cook was on that. And I got to serve with her on the executive committee. And I think she and I both felt, oh, isn't this great to have a woman running Duke? Nan, this is how Nan was. When they were planning, and of course, I was not on the board then, but Russ being with the Duke Endowment, we went for inauguration. And one of the things she did before her formal inauguration that morning, she had I ran with Nan T-shirts. And so she asked the students that would do it to run a mile with her. And so they ran with Nan. Now, that's an unusual way to begin your presidency. But it was who she was. I mean, and when she stayed with us, she went out and ran up to the Parkway. So she was natural, energetic, enthusiastic, and made women feel that they could do anything. So she was great.
Oh,
truly great.
That's wonderful. I also know that you served on the Presidential Search Committee that recommended Dick Broadhead to succeed President
Yes.
Cohan. And tell us a little bit about that.
I was very pleased to be on that search committee. What I was thinking is, let's look for someone who was really, really good. And Duke was not in any way hurting or suffering. There were no big problems that needed solving. It was just, who can we bring in to lead us now at a different time? Who will it be? Allison Halton, you all know her. She was the chairman of the committee. Allison was the assistant to the president. And we first met Dick in New York City. He came in and we interviewed him, and I've told him this. I wasn't real sure how interested he was in us at that time, coming from Yale.
Right.
We pared down, got down to 4 maybe, and he came, and we asked him to come, and I was so pleased he said he would. And he came down, and we interviewed him, not in Durham, but just outside Durham, over in the Chapel Hill area.
Okay.
And I felt, oh, good, he's warming toward us now. He had a manner about him that was almost like a genius. And I hope he'll come. So we had a great meeting. We knew we were in a lot of competition. He was in, I think people thought he would be president of Yale. He was president dean of the college.
Right.
So we decided that he was the one for us, and we hoped that we were the one he wanted. And he accepted. I'll never forget it. Dick was superb, just superb in every way. I remember once he was speaking when the new wing of the law school was being built, and he's such a good speaker. And I went up to him, I said, Dick, since Russ went here, I'd love to get your notes and copy your speech. And he reached in his pocket, it was an envelope. And on the back was this tiny little scrawl of about that long. He said, here it is. I said, that's okay. But I thought he was marvelous. We had, I feel like our mountain house was a place for presidents. He and Cindy spent a weekend with us up in Linville. And it was just so good to be with him, and he's done so many wonderful things. With Nan, it was the Duke-Durham partnership. I think it was one of the best things she ever did, because she made Duke seem a part of Durham better than it had been before. With Dick, I think the Duke Engage, and then the effort to build a fund of $300 million to bring in students who could not afford to come to Duke. Those two instances, it's called the Financial Aid Initiative.
Oh, okay.
And then Duke Engage. I think those were two of the things that Dick did that defined so much his time at Duke.
Say something more about the Financial Aid Initiative you just made a reference to. You chaired that, and why was that so important to you, to the university, to higher education?
Yes. Dick asked me to co-chair it with Rick Wagner.
Okay.
And so we did that. And Dick said, we've got to get students who can't afford to come here into this place, but we need some extra funding to do that. And the Duke Endowment wanted to be part of it too. So they became a big part of it. We wanted to help raise the funds, which we did, and we wanted to meet the students that came to campus that we took because of that. We didn't have day-to-day work to do other than really fundraising. But I'll never forget, we got to meet some of the students that came to Duke on financial aid. And I'll tell you one story. There was a young man, of course I can't remember his name, and he was from somewhere in Virginia. His family was not well off. They had to sell their house. They were very poor. The father somehow got into the business of iron making, particularly making elaborate iron banisters for stairways. of all things, Tallman was working on the Divinity School edition.
Okay.
And this young man who was at Duke then, his father was the one that did the banisters in the stairway going up, beautiful wrought iron.
Oh, wow.
The next time you're there, take a look.
Wow.
That was the father. This young boy grew up, and the last time I spoke to him was on the bridge to the Bryant Cellar.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I've just heard some great news. And he was a root-tilting scholar to the NYU Law School. Now that's a beautiful example, I think, of the financial aid initiative.
Yeah, that's so human. It's so Duke.
It's so Duke.
It's so Duke.
It's so
That's what
Duke.
I'm learning.
Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. Now, you also mentioned the Duke Engage.
Yes.
And I know you were a member of that National Advisory Board at some point. Could you say something more about the creation of Duke Engage and what were the goals of the program when it was founded?
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that Peter was eager for us to do this, Peter Lang, our provost.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow we were lucky enough, Duke was, to get Eric Malin who is in political science, I believe. But he took the time off from whatever he'd been teaching and headed the Duke Engage efforts for 4 or 5 years until he retired. I'm not sure what he's doing. I think he's doing something for Duke. But I'm
He
not
is.
sure.
He's still around the university.
Yeah. So it was wonderful because Dick and his team had come up with this idea that Duke, when you came to Duke, a student, it was, and I think it was Vince, it may be in that dialogue with the three presidents, in a way, you went into a bubble. Everything was great. Beautiful campus, bright students, wonderful professors, but there was more to life than that. And so one way to get out of the bubble, and this, I'm sort of quoting, I think it was Vince that used that word, was to come up with something different to get that you could have an immersive condition, a situation off campus where you connected with people who were in totally different circumstances than you. And at the same time, to learn more about the world. So the international part was very big. Students were going all over the world. And yet some were working domestically that worked for them in 6 or 7 cities. Charlotte was one. And I love this. Charlotte, Michael Marsicano was involved in this too. We had a group of 6 or 7 students each year for about 5 years. Of course, they'd rather go off to Europe, but here they came. And so I remember one night, Russ and I had a little party for the 6 students that year. And Jay Billis, whom you all know, came to the party. And people was talking about Duke Engage and how did it happen. And so I said, Jay, I hope you don't mind my saying this, but we've been told that up until this past year, when students who admitted to Duke were asked, how did you first get interested in Duke? The majority said through Duke basketball. But this year, they said through Duke Engage.
Oh, wow.
And I apologize, Jay.
Right. He wasn't offended, I
No,
hope.
he was not offended. But it was a wonderful program. And one thing I'll have to say, if you don't mind this personal note, our grandson, Will Robinson, signed up for Duke Engage. And he was in South Africa. And it was while he was there with about 7 other students that he met this young woman who was also on the Duke campus. They met and fell in love there. And they are married and have 2 children that live in Durham.
Oh, wow.
Duke Engage.
Literally engaged.
Literally. But it's a wonderful program, and I know it's Eric has stepped aside, of course, and I think it's I'm not sure where it's located, but I hope and believe it's still going strong.
It is. It's currently based in the Keenan Institute of Ethics.
Yes, that's right. I remember hearing.
And still
It's
thriving.
Still and very
as far as I
popular with
know, it
students.
is. It really
Wonderful.
is. Yeah.
Well, those two things that Dick did, I think, were great. Financial aid and Duke Engage. He was outstanding.
That's great. Well, let me turn. Well, I guess you were a history major, of course, but to a historical moment. We both served on President Price's commission.
Yes, I remember.
On memory and history, and obviously you were involved. We were involved in the recommendation regarding the statue of Robert E. Lee.
Yes.
On the portal of Duke Chapel,
Right.
and its ultimate removal that President Price decided. But talk about Duke's relationship with its history.
All right. I may not have much in depth, but I can give my thoughts. When I went to Duke, there were no black students. There was no, as far as I could tell, no one was even talking about it then. But then I left in 55, or actually 56 when Russ left. But then, and then our kids went to Duke, but well before they went, in the 60s was when it brewed up. And at last, there was some effort made to change that history of not having any black students. And of course, Wilhelmina, who got to be a very dear friend of mine through the Duke Endowment, and my coming with Russ when he would come, she was one of the 5. And I believe, Luke, that she was the beauty queen her sophomore year, I think.
Oh, wow.
But which was wonderful. So those were some strides, but there was so much more that needed to be done. Taking 5, like sort of token, that didn't work.
Right.
And then, of course, the 60s were a time of turmoil anyway across the nation. And there was just a lot. I didn't really know about it then, but apparently it was pretty bad. And slowly we've begun to, and I hope we're well underway.
Right.
But I think that made naming the building the Wilhelmina Cook Building, they changed that. Remember?
That's right.
I thought that was perfect. And the Duke Endowment and John Hope Franklin, and we changed, but we were late, we were slow. And am I right that Julian Abel, who designed the chapel, that he wasn't allowed on campus?
There's some competing histories about that, but that's the strongest narrative, that he wasn't allowed.
That is just unbelievable. And I'm so pleased that Dick, another great thing Dick did is change the name of the choir.
That's right.
And Russ and I were there. And some of Abel's children or grandchildren were there, and you were there, of course.
Right.
But that was a great stride. I'm sure that pleased you.
It did.
Good.
Yeah. No.
But we had a long way to go, and I hope we're there. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's an ongoing work.
Yeah, there you
because
go.
if you look back at the history, you were there in the 50s. You talk about the 60s and the tumultuous times, but yet the first 5 black undergraduates come, and so it's a gradual evolution, and I think it continues to unfold. Really, in many ways.
Yeah,
and
well,
as
I hope so.
the university grows and develops.
Yeah, I hope so.
So you majored in history, and why was that? And how has that influenced your life, majoring in history?
Well, I think I always liked stories, and my father, being a good bit older than I, used to tell me a lot about the history of his growing up in Stokes County, North Carolina. So I always thought I would like history. And then when I went to this prep school, St. Mary's, I had a history teacher, Mabel Morrison, who was born in England but had come to this country, and she taught the history of England. And I loved it. And I thought, oh gosh, I've got to do more of this. So when I went to Duke, And of course, in those days, you had to get some things out of the way. You had a certain degree of science, certain degree of foreign language. So immediately I knew I wanted to major in history. And thinking about our conversation coming up today, I thought about Dr. Watson, Dr. Ferguson, Dr. Woody. These are people that, when I took history, my freshman year, I had two of those gentlemen, and then on with others. I just loved it. And I liked English as a minor because I thought that the stories from the English, through novels and things, pointed up to history. So I just loved it. It meant the world to me. And I was real pleased that one of the deans at that time called me in and asked me if I would consider going to graduate school in history. And I said, thank you. No, I'm not going to be doing that, but thank you. So, you know, I think that showed that how much I cared for it. I'm going to pull up a magazine.
Please do.
I've always loved history. And one day, I was looking at the American Scholar, and this is from autumn of 1998. And on the front was a list of the topics, and one said, only connect. And I thought, that sounds interesting. So I opened it up, and it was a chapter written by a professor from the Midwest. And his question was, how can you tell if a person has had a good liberal arts education? How can you tell? What are the characteristics? And so he pointed them out as he went through this. And they were things like someone with a good liberal arts education knows how to listen, they read, they understand, they write clearly, and on until the 10th. And the 10th was this. And you know H.M. Forrester. H.M. Forrester in Howard's End used the term only connect. Only connect. And then this is what he said. More than anything else, being an educated person means being able to see connections that allow one to make sense of the world and act within it in creative ways. Every one of the qualities I have described up till now, listening, reading, talking, writing, truth-seeking, lead up to this. It's learning how to work in community. It's about connecting. A liberal education is about gaining the power, the wisdom, the generosity, and the freedom to connect. And that meant so much to me. It's kind of rang a bell.
Yeah.
I thought, that's what Duke did for me. Through those history courses, they taught me not as much as some people, but I was on the way. So I treasure this a lot. 1998.
Okay, love that. Connections.
Yeah.
Connections. Well, you and your husband, Russ, are recognized for exceptional service at Duke, of course, but also your civic service, your philanthropy that's benefited so many people, so many organizations. What is the impetus behind this commitment to help others that both you and Russ share?
Well, you're very gracious in saying that. There's so much more others do and that we could do. But we do love to be involved. Now that Russ is not well, we aren't able to do it now, but we have loved being active in Charlotte and at Duke. Those are the two places that we love. And for myself, I have to thank my mother for this. My mother, who grew up in a time when women in Charlotte were never on any nonprofit boards. There were always auxiliaries. They weren't quite up to being on the board, really. The only exceptions to that were the main exception was the YWCA. That was for women. And my mother was president of that organization. And back in that day, this is unbelievable, back in that day, and there were two sections to the Observer, local and the Natural. I still have this. I look at it. There's a picture of my mother on the front page of the local with 5 other women all dressed up. And they are the new officers of the YWCA. And I remember looking at that and thinking, I'd like to do something like that, like my mother does. And I had one of my favorite things. It was a little silver urn about this big that was given to my mother when she stepped down, and I look at it every day. So that influenced my wanting to be involved in my community of Charlotte. And then, of course, Duke came to me and to Russ kind of together, because that's where we had been most serious in dating and where we lived when we first got married. So at home and at Duke is the main thing. And for both of us, Russ, of course, I think he just grew up wanting to be part of things. I just think it's in his blood to want to do that. And to give back financially, we just wish we could give more. But it's just great to think that by giving a little to this and maybe to that, that's about it. It's nothing real dramatic.
But you had such a great impact on the university in Charlotte and so many. And I don't know if you remember the in the bylaws, university bylaws, which I've become pretty interested in during the Centennial time. The Article 1 aims, the very last aim, you and Russ embody so well, knowledge in service to society.
Oh, thank you. That's so gracious of you.
You represent the university, embody it so well.
Well, that's a great honor to hear you say that. Thank you.
The just a little thinking about you and Russ together, and that Duke connection. And it is hard, and you made a reference to Jay Billis, and it's hard not to think about Duke and Duke basketball in particular, and not just academics, but athletics, which I actually think is also, it's the holistic approach to education, something. Now, is it true, what I hear is you and Russ are big Duke basketball fans. How did that even come to be? I mean, it's interesting because you listened to the football game, the Rose Bowl football, and became a student. Just how did that love for Duke basketball
Well, it's
come
interesting.
to you and Russ?
Up until about the time I went to Duke, football at Duke was the main thing. And I listened to all the games on the radio.
Okay.
I got to only about 3. My mother would take me sometimes, but that wasn't happening much. But it was football that I loved. And then when I went off to high school at St. Mary's, my brothers were big into basketball because Sammy Ranzino and Dick Dickey and Everett Case had come onto the scene and made basketball at State quite prominent. And I used to listen to those games on the radio at night. And only when I came to Duke did it begin to turn towards basketball. And the one figure that made that happen was Dick Grote.
Okay.
Dick Grote, who was fantastic to watch play. And he was the boyfriend of my sorority sister, Rachel. So there was Rachel's boyfriend playing. Turned out to be an All-American. Dick Grote was one of our most famous early players.
Okay.
So then that switched to basketball. And so I'm kind of a nut. I'm a little bit more tempered now that I'm older, but at home, I had to sit on the same stool to watch every game that Duke played on. If I didn't sit on the stool, they would go lose. Then I had a yo-yo, and I would yo-yo if the game got close, you know, and that helped pull us through. But one of my funny stories is that one night we were going to a symphony, Charlotte Symphony uptown. Duke was really playing an important game. I almost didn't want to go, but I had a little portable radio I took, and I thought, well, maybe at some point, this was before earplugs. I thought, well, maybe I can just get the score. So they ended this piece, and people were clapping, and I thought I would get the score. And I didn't know that the man in front could hear. And he turned around and he said, first time I've ever heard of Tchaikovsky and Coach K at the same time. Krzyzewski and Tchaikovsky at the same time. So that's the way it is. And I never miss a game on the radio. I'm sorry that we can't go and sit in Section 3 like we used to. But our grandson will, 3. And his wife, they're there.
Okay.
So I feel like I have a love affair with Duke University.
Yeah.
And it's just enriched my life tremendously.
Oh, so special. Well, I'm going to take, before I get to the final 2 related questions about Centennial oriented, I want to take a Dean of the Chapel privilege here and really ask you all these years and just because so often, when you were coming back and forth, I would see you and Russ in the chapel at baccalaureate or whatever it may be, a special service here or there in Duke Chapel. What has the chapel meant to you over time at Duke?
Well, that's very interesting. Russ was raised as Episcopalian. I was raised as a Methodist.
Okay.
That was a little bit of a problem when we first got married because Russ would continually to say, how can you have a real communion when you're drinking Welch's grape juice? Episcopalians don't do that. No. So that was a bit of a touchy affair. But when I got Russ over there for the first time at Duke Chapel, he fell in love with it. I mean, just the beauty of the place, the music of the place. And so when we were not married, just students, we went every Sunday.
Wow.
We did that when we got married. When the baby Cammie came, we sometimes couldn't get there because of babysitter. And when we come back, Luke, to go in that place and the beauty of the architecture, the beauty of the music, the glass in the windows, and then the choir, it was just magnificent. And I've never heard a bad sermon at Duke. I mean, you have added so much to it. You really have.
Thank you.
And it's our favorite place to go to worship. And I'm just sorry we don't get there more. We have watched some online, but it's not the same.
No, definitely
not. Heard some good sermons.
Thank you. Well, obviously, this is the Centennial celebration, and all through your long history with Duke, what about Duke makes you most proud?
Wow, that's a tough one. That's a tough one. When I'm at Duke, I have a sense of place. I feel in place. And there's so many parts, and we've talked about that. The students, my friends, the students, the faculty, sports, the chapel. For some reason, I'm just feel in place. I don't know, besides my hometown where I grew up, no place that I go gives me that sense of place that Duke does. It's just a combination of so many things.
Wow.
But I mean it.
That's great. Sense of belonging. And
yes.
As they talk about today, quite a bit belonging.
Yeah.
But that place.
Yeah, it's that sense of place.
Well, one last question. As we look towards the 2nd century of the university, what are your hopes for Duke?
Well, I've listened twice to Judy Woodruff's interview with the 3 presidents.
Right.
And when I finished both times, I felt inspired and grateful. Grateful for what they've done for Duke, inspired by their love of this place and what they think of it. And Judy kind of asked questions sort of like that. There was no specific answer, but what they were saying is they felt so blessed to be in a community that was optimistic, that thought that better days were even ahead than the wonderful time they've had, the commitment to the university, the way people work together at Duke. One of them said there's a sense of enthusiasm that's just amazing. So, and then they said, whatever changes are made, let's do it Duke's way. Let's don't try to be like some other institution. Let's be Duke. And that's the way I feel. I just want Duke to be Duke. I don't know I haven't been on the board in a long time. I don't know what's in the works, if anything.
Right.
But let's do it the Duke way and keep strong what we've got, because it's a blessed place.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
Well, Sally, thank you so much
I've had the
for
best time.
taking the time. It's so good to see you.
Oh, it's great to see you.
And that little piece you read about connections.
Yes.
You and Russ have helped hundreds of people here in Charlotte, there at Duke, to connect with meaningful places to serve, to connect with one another. And so thank you, and I'm grateful for our connection.
I've had the best
so
time
grateful.
being here with you.
So thank you for everything you have done for this university.
Well, thank you for what you've done and for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.